Hi, I'm Mike Burr, Android Enterprise Security Specialist. Thanks for taking the time to join us for Android on Air, our ongoing video series dedicated to helping organizations learn about Android and how to put the platform to work. Today I want to dig into the truth about Android vulnerabilities, exploits, and malware.
But before we actually get started, I wanted to kind of give you a little intro into what to expect during this live stream. You'll notice in this live stream session, if you look towards the bottom of the screen, there's actually an area where you can ask questions during the live stream. And part of my team will actually try to answer those questions as we go through the live stream. But also keep in mind that if we do not get to your questions, you can always come back to this site and view this recording on demand. And all those questions will then be answered and you'll be able to see them once we get it posted as on demand. Also, towards the very end of the live stream, you'll see a survey pop up on the right-hand side. It's really, really important that you guys just take 30 seconds. It's just a few quick questions. Well, we really need you to answer those if you can. It gives us insight into how we can better prepare material for you next time. So we would really appreciate it if you guys would actually take advantage of that and provide us with that information very quickly. Okay, so now we want to kind of bring up the concept of how security is wrapped around the entire device. Using Android Enterprise, which is the new modern Android device management capabilities, we manage devices, and then we also manage the apps that are deployed on that device. The device management and application management are all circled with security. And security provides that comprehensive, multi-layered architecture that the device management and application distribution rely on to secure the data, not only on a consumer side, but or the personal side, but mostly for devices that are deployed for business use. So the management of a device through Android Enterprise is and provides a very consistent and flexible capability, and it is required by Google for all OEMs and carriers to use. We will talk about this a little bit as we move forward, but the CDD or compatibility definition document is a standard by which OEMs and carriers must build their devices to meet the CTS, the compatibility test suite. And we mandate these Android Enterprise device management capabilities. Same with the application distribution capabilities, which is provided through a private managed Google Play Store that is specifically created for a enterprise to use in an Android Enterprise deployment. And then again, as I mentioned, wrapped around all that is security. And as we move forward, we're going to talk about all the components based in hardware, through the operating system, through services, and then how we mitigate all those different attack vectors. We still hear in the ecosystem from ecosystem partners and customers concerns around Android security. But in reality, Google, as well as many of the external vendors, security researchers, and even the threat detection and threat prevention companies, as well as researchers in the analyst community, now state that Android actually is the leader in mobile security. There's still security issues out there. We're not trying to negate that, but the reality that Android is insecure is really kind of far from the truth these days, as the ecosystem is reporting. And we still hear a few things about Android when we talk to customers. So we'll kind of uncover these. But one is that there's too many vulnerabilities and the risk is too high to use Android for business use. So we'll uncover those today and kind of unpack how we feel we've prevented vulnerabilities, and the ecosystem has actually proven that we've done a really good job of that. The other component is, we still hear, Android is full of malware, and it's easy for users to install bad apps. Well, when you have a managed device with Android Enterprise, the reality of malware getting on a device is actually pretty rare and very, very difficult to do. So we'll unpack that a little bit today as well. And then finally, we hear, it's easier than other mobile platforms to exploit. Well, again, as we mentioned, remember, an exploit needs to get on the device first, right? And in a managed environment, when you control how applications get to a device, we can very strongly attest and prevent applications from getting on these mobile devices when they're managed. So we'll unpack all these as we move forward to kind of show you how we prevent vulnerabilities from being exploited, and then how we actually prevent malware from being installed on the device that has those exploits. Now, before we jump in, and what we're here to talk about today is what vulnerabilities, exploits, and malware are, and then how we mitigate those with modern Android Enterprise capabilities. So we're going to talk about those 4 areas. The first is vulnerability. So it's important to understand what a vulnerability definition is. Now, I don't want to insult the intelligence of everyone, but I have to set a standard here of what we're going to be talking about. So vulnerabilities is defined as a software flaw that is potentially, and the key word here is potentially, exposed, where there is a possibility of being attacked. All right, so vulnerability is a chance. We will call it a chance. An exploit is actually a piece of software that is designed to take advantage of that vulnerability or a vulnerability in a system, typically for malicious purposes, right? And the way that it's typically delivered, exploits are typically delivered through malware. Not always, but typically. And malware is defined as software that is designed to disrupt, damage, or gain unauthorized access to a system, right? So we see the progression here. Vulnerabilities are a chance. Exploits are software that are written to try and take advantage of that potentially exposed vulnerability. And then malware is a vehicle by which hackers attempt to get exploits onto devices to take advantage. So right there, you've got 3 areas or 3 steps in a very tall ladder. You have to build malware that delivers an exploit that then takes advantage of vulnerabilities. And then finally, mitigation. How do we stop all those different layers from hitting a device? How do we stop malware, number one, from getting on the device? If malware does get on the device, how do we prevent the exploit from taking place? And if an exploit does take place, how do we actually limit what that exploit can actually access? And that's with these mitigations, right? And again, a mitigation is defined as a technique, right? It's a technique that's used to reduce or prevent the severity, seriousness, or even impact of an exploit delivered by malware or malware itself. So again, vulnerability, chance, exploit software to potentially take advantage of that vulnerability, and then malware, which number one needs to get on the device. Keep in mind, malware is software, exploits is software, and vulnerabilities is software, right? So as we move forward, I can't highlight enough that vulnerability is not an exploit, right? I hear people say that a lot, where vulnerability is the same as an exploit. It's not the same. A vulnerability is a chance. Exploit is something that's trying to take advantage of that chance, or software that's trying to take advantage of that vulnerability. Now we'll go through this hardware layer, operating system layer, and then applications and services, because I want to show you kind of a progression of how a piece of malware may try to get on an Android device, because remember, that is the typical way that an exploit is delivered. So the first rung in that ladder is to get a piece of malware or a piece of code onto the device. And we prevent that with hardware at the very base layer. So we support hardware-backed security in Android, and that's kind of the genesis of protecting a device. We have to have hardware capabilities that secure the software as we move up the stack. And this is a sampling of some of the hardware-backed security capabilities and the items that build on top of that to protect a device at the hardware layer. So number one, we talked about, we support hardware-backed security. This is kind of where cryptographic functions are executed in dedicated hardware. That's one component that hardware-backed security provides, but essentially it's the foundation of protection on which the OS lives, and it protects many other processes on the device. Now, as we move up the stack here on hardware mitigation, we have something called verified boot. Now, verified boot is a process by which the operating system steps as it's loading up are cryptographically verified at each step. This basically provides device integrity from when the device is turned on all the way up to the point where the user must enter their passcode or screen lock to enter into the user space. So this, again, verified boot is a cryptographic verification process to provide device integrity at boot time. Okay. Now, as we move up the stack, we've implemented two other capabilities that help protect a device from being compromised by a hacker in the case where the device is either stolen or lost. And the first one is called version binding. And that ensures that keys created with a newer operating system, such as Android 10 or Android Pie, cannot be used by an older operating system. So, in other words, a key is inserted into that hardware-backed security on the device that says this device can only use this particular version of Android, and that the keys can't be extracted and used in an older version. In combination to that, or complementary to that, is rollback prevention. And what that does is because those keys are in the hardware-backed security, an attacker can't downgrade the operating system of a device to an older version of Android that may have a vulnerability that the hacker knows how to expose to get access to the user data on the device. And by the way, up to this point, in order to break through verified boot and version binding and rollback prevention to get to user data or the user partition on an Android device, in most cases, the device needs to be what's called the bootloader needs to be unlocked. And part of the system protection is that when a bootloader is unlocked, the result of that is that the user partition is wiped. So even if a user were successful at rolling back an older operating system, in order to make that happen, he or she has to unlock the bootloader, which then would erase the user partition. So there would be nothing for the hacker to actually get from the device. So as we move even further up the stack, we're in a running environment. The TEE, which is the trusted execution environment, is part of the processor, which is used for key generation, key imports, signing, and verification services, and it's executed in hardware, separated from the operating system processor, so that it is protected. And most operations running in the TEE are actually secure, even from root process. Again, you have to find an exploit, and then, as we mentioned, get an exploit on the device to take advantage of that vulnerability. And as we move forward, you'll see how much more difficult that is to do. So really, the TEE is there to secure those critical tasks and operations that the operating system must ensure are not compromised. And then finally, kind of based on the hardware-backed security, the secure lock screen, right? This is what protects the device when it's lost or stolen from someone trying to gain access to your device or a user's device. And using the secure lock screen PIN and verification, that process actually is used to derive the encryption keys. So it protects the data by using encryption. And it's a combination of the PIN plus the hardware key is used to actually derive those encryption keys. We'll talk a little bit more about this as we get into the operating system, but essentially the screen lock is used to secure the device from unauthorized access, either by lost or stolen device. And that protects the device. So you must get through all these layers in order to get past all these hardware mitigations. Now, The operating system. Remember, the operating system sits on top of those hardware-based security capabilities on the devices. The first is being SE Linux, or Security Enhanced Linux. Android is built on SE Linux. It uses that kernel to secure the operations of the operating system. And basically, if an exploit is found, the attack or the attack vector is limited to a very small part of the kernel, or what we call a domain. So the SE Linux has over 60 domains or areas, such as encryption and media and some various other domains. The idea here is that in order to gain access to any real user data, to break out of those domains, an attacker must chain or combine exploits in order to get to user data, and SE Linux helps prevent that. Okay. The second component is mitigation technology that we build into the operating system. These are best practice capabilities that modern operating systems use. One being ASLR and KASLR. That's an acronym for address space layout randomization. This is a technique by which every time an application is loaded into memory, it is loaded into different memory address space. So even if an application has a vulnerability and an attacker knows that that application has a vulnerability, it's very difficult for that attacker to write an exploit to take advantage of that vulnerability, because every time the application loads, that vulnerable part of code may be in, and most often is always in, a different memory address space. So the vulnerability is kind of obfuscated, and the exploit doesn't really know what address to go attack. So that's kind of a technique that we've used in the operating system for a very long time. And then there's other components such as control flow integrity, which is a capability that protects the kernel, and then some other capabilities there such as execute-only memory and shadow call stack. These are just fancy terms for different capabilities that are provided in the operating system to prevent buffer overflows and prevent exploits from even running in a memory, because it's tagged as execute only instead of read only, right? Now that's prevents compromise. Now, as we move up the stack, we get into the application layer, and every application runs in its own sandbox. That is done to ensure one app can't talk to or look at the data of another app. So if one app is compromised, for example, it cannot gain access or be subverted to gain access to any other application. So it really isolates the apps from one another, not only the user apps, but also the applications that are running all the way down in the operating system. Processes are actually separated as well. And it's the typical Linux environment where every application or process runs with its own user ID or UID. And basically, combined with the SE Linux rules and application permissions, you're basically limiting what an app can actually see on the rest of the system. So you're really limiting exposure by doing that application sandboxing. So it really, at the end, protects app data, right? Now, on a managed device, we have work profiles, and a work profile provides very strong separation between a personal side of the device and then a part of the device that is protected and controlled by the enterprise. It prevents work apps from communicating with personal apps and vice versa. And the apps actually run in a separate user space all the way to the SE Linux kernel. So the apps, again, they by being sandboxed, not only are they sandboxed, but they're also isolated from communicating with one another more strongly with this work profile separation. And the work profile also uses its own encryption key to protect work apps and data when you use what's called a work challenge. So when you set up a passcode or PIN to open a work app, that is used, or that PIN and passcode is actually used to derive a new encryption key for all work data. So even if the personal side of the device is compromised, the work data is still encrypted at rest and thus would be very difficult to access. Now, Having all these in place, these are just a few of the mitigations in the operating system, but that does limit your exposure to a device getting a piece of malware. And then all these mitigation components prevent malware from actually exploiting any potential vulnerabilities that could possibly be on your devices. Now, we talk about the hardware and the software. Let's talk about the application mitigation. Android is only effective when you have applications. You need applications. So the first layer is that the device is encrypted. Android devices are mandatorily encrypted. I still hear today that Android devices can be decrypted or they're not encrypted by default. That couldn't be further from the truth. All Android devices back to Android Marshmallow or Android 6.0 have been required to be encrypted out of the box. So there's no need to worry about whether your device is encrypted or not, or whether your users' devices are encrypted or not. If they're Marshmallow above, they are encrypted mandatorily out of the box. And again, the result of that is protecting the data at rest. And we want to prevent unauthorized access or extraction of user data. And that's what the device encryption does. Now, we've also implemented something called runtime permissions. These are permissions that are displayed to a user at runtime and when the device is controlled or managed with modern Android capabilities. IT administrators have access to granularly control permissions for apps. For example, if an IT admin wants to deploy an application for use that requires maybe the camera or the microphone, right? But the admin doesn't want the user to use those two features or those two permissions in the app, he can deny those permissions to the app. So when the user opens the app, they can use all functions within the app except for the microphone and the camera. And that is the design of what we call runtime permissions. They can be controlled at a more granular capability versus all or nothing. And then for the user's ability, they can see applications when they install them, and then when they use them, the first time the application wants to use any type of piece of hardware like the microphone or GPS or access the contacts, for example, the user is prompted to give access to that particular resource by the application. So now it's visible up front in the user's face. So if the user saw where in a game wanted access to your contacts as a rudimentary kind of example, the user would then say, well, why does this game want access to my contacts? So it's right there in their face at time of use. So it's much more visible. And again, these runtime permissions provide access control capabilities. Strong biometrics. We've introduced capabilities for quite some time now where the fingerprint, for example, provides a strong device lock mechanism, and it's used in conjunction with a strong passcode or PIN. But the biometrics make it easy for users to access the device. But those password and screen lock protections are protected now in new services that are running in modern Android that prevent lock screen and passcode brute force with rate limiting technology. So for example, a 6-digit passcode to be brute forced on the device now would take an exceedingly long period of time. We're talking years because of this rate limiting technology. Every time a missed passcode entry is tried, it exponentially gets longer before the next try can be taken. So that's how we've strengthened the capability of passcode protection using biometrics. Then we have to protect the data coming in and out of the device, and we've done that by implementing very strong and industry-leading network capabilities, right? Best-in-class capabilities. So in modern Android, for example, in Android 10, we've mandated that TLS 1.3 is the default. It will downgrade to connect to servers that are still using TLS 1.2 and 1.1, but we actually implemented TLS 1.3 in Android 10, which is much more secure than its predecessors. We've also implemented in things such as DNS over TLS, which prevents DNS leakage and also provides a capability for admins to keep a user from changing a DNS server to bypass proxies and things of that nature. And then there's many, many new capabilities for VPN usage for business devices on a per app basis, as well as always on and per profile or complete work profile VPN capabilities. So that's how we some of the things we're doing to secure data in transit. So we can protect a piece of malware or an exploit from hitting the device over the network. That's just another layer to protect the device. Finally, being able to secure how those apps get on a device, right? So when you're managing a device with Android Enterprise, best practice is to use something called the Managed Google Play Store. Basically what that does is it requires all applications deployed via an EMM through the Managed Google Play Store. It securely provides a very secure way to deploy and configure apps to a work-managed device or to a work profile. And it prevents all sideloading. So there's no capability for a user to install an application by downloading an APK from a website, installing an APK from an SD card, or via Bluetooth or NFC injection, or even by installing an app over the USB through ADB, the debugging bridge from connecting to a laptop. So you've really prevented all avenues from a user or a bad actor from injecting a piece of or a part of an application or even malware over any avenue. So you've really siloed that capability. And that's really the genesis of trying to get your device secured from an application perspective. So using that safe application store. Now, these are just a few of the application mitigations, right? There's many more, but this kind of gives you a sense of how hard it is to even get a piece of malware exploit on a device with strong application controls. Finally, we come to the Google standards, right? So every device that is on the planet today that has Google mobile services, we mentioned earlier the CDD, which is the compatibility definition document, and CTS, which is the compatibility test suite. Those are the CDD is the set of standards that an OEM or a carrier must build their device and firmware to. And then the compatibility test suite is how we verify that the OEM and or carrier built that device to Google standards, right? Once we do that, the device can then go through some more testing to get a GMS license. So again, we provide standards for the ecosystem to ensure that best practices are in place. We also implemented several different capabilities for researchers to submit vulnerabilities that they find and potential exploit code and even snippets of code that correct those to Google. And we provide that through the security rewards program incentives, where researchers actually supply that and we pay them. So we're relying on the research community, and that includes vendors, universities, white hat hackers, and all the other various vendors in the ecosystem to help us strengthen the operating system. Now, some of the services that get layered on top of devices that actually go through this process and get GMS or Google Mobile Services, they get something called safe browsing. That's been around for years. It helps provide a safe browsing experience for users in Chrome and other other browsers, and it basically prevents malware and unwanted apps and social engineering. So when a user visits a website that has known malware or tries to subvert users or use social engineering techniques to get the user to do something, safe browsing can actually prevent users from doing that. And there's many controls, knobs and levers, if you will, that the EMM can implement around safe browsing to meet their specific risk and security protections. The other layer, or layer above that, is something called Safety Net. And Safety Net provides services that help protect devices from all kinds of different things that can happen, such as security threats or known security threats. to include device tampering. There's services running that detect when a device is being tampered with, from visiting bad URLs, installing potentially harmful apps or malware, and even fake users or social media capabilities, and things like reCAPTCHA and two-factor authentication. A lot of these are in safety net. The EMMs have APIs that allow you to take advantage of what's called safety net attestation, which allows an EMM to call Google or have the device call Google and attest that it is what it says it is. So it provides robust device integrity to ensure that the devices haven't been compromised. And if a device is detected as compromised, the EMM can do compliance actions against that device to mitigate. And then finally, Google Play Protect. This is Google's built-in on-device malware protection on Android, and it's backed by Google's machine learning. It goes in conjunction and works with the Google Play Store and Safety Net, but it basically is Google's on-device application or malware scanning capability. It's always on. It scans all applications that get installed on the device, whether work or personal, and even system apps. And it even works when the device is not connected to the internet. So that is Google's capability called Google Play Protect. And all those services help, again, protect a device from a piece of malware that would deliver an exploit to take advantage of a vulnerability from actually getting on a device. Now, let's talk about a new capability that Google worked with several vendors called the App Defense Alliance. The App Defense Alliance was really created, and it was with these vendors to ensure the safety of the Google Play Store. So with the partners, we did exactly what Google does best. We worked with the ecosystem. The Android ecosystem is open, and we allow everyone to help us make it better, right? So together with these three partners, ESET, Lookout, and Zimperium, we were able to now quickly find potentially harmful apps in all kinds of categories and take action upon those to protect the users. So it's really a combined scanning capability for the apps that are in Google Play by not only Google itself, but also ESET, Lookout, and Zimperium. So in a managed environment, the apps that you choose to deploy that are public apps that you choose to deploy for business uses, you'll know that those apps are now scanned by this App Defense Alliance team. We talked about this earlier, but the Android Security Rewards Program, this one is particularly for the Pixel device. But again, this is kind of give you a sampling of what Google actually pays out to the research community for providing us with information on vulnerabilities they find. And we disclose those, we give them credit for that, and we also pay them. So you can see here an example is, we talked about the trusted execution environment. If someone or a researcher can show Google that there's a vulnerability in the trusted execution environment code, we will pay them up to $250,000, right? So you can see here a couple of the areas that we will pay the research community if they provide us with the code that shows that there's a vulnerability in the operating system. And this is how we've actually, I believe, and many believe, exponentially increased the security of Android right out of the box. And then finally, all those capabilities that we've talked about prior are controlled through security and risk with Android Enterprise. We have many management capabilities. We provide data separation between work and personal. There's multiple management modes, whether you're deploying a device in a BYOD environment or you're fully managing a device with just a work environment. All these things we've talked about are controlled through your EMM partners such that you can meet your risk posture, and you basically have a lot of what I call knobs and levers to deploy a device in the appropriate mode it needs to be used in, provide that data separation, protect the data, and basically enable all those management security capabilities to control access for applications and prevent malware and exploits from even getting on the device in the first place. So let's do a review. We talked about hardware, we talked about the operating system, we talked about the applications, and we explained what vulnerabilities, exploits, and malware were. And then we also explained the standards and the services that Google puts on these devices for safeguarding the security of these devices and protecting the devices from being compromised. So remember, at the hardware layer, Android security begins by using hardware-backed security, and it helps ensure that the device's integrity is not compromised. That is the basis of everything that happens on Android regarding security. The operating system uses the SE Linux kernel, security enhanced Linux kernel. We implement things such as application sandboxing and many other anti-exploitation technologies to prevent an exploit that even gets on a device from reaching a vulnerability. So it protects the system from compromise and ensures that the data is secure. In the application realm, controlling how applications get on a device protects the operating system, because then a piece of malware and application doesn't even have the ability to get onto the device. So if you limit the access of how applications get onto a managed device through managed Google Play, you have a strong assurance that malware and bad apps and exploits won't get on your device to begin with. And that ensures that the data is always encrypted. There's data is secured in transit over the network and VPN if you choose to use those. We provide robust access control permissions that are controlled by IT. And then, as I mentioned, controlling all avenues to get apps onto a device through managed Google Play provides a safe way to deploy apps and configure them and remove all side-loading capabilities. And then finally, standards and services. We mentioned the CDD, the compatibility definition document, and the compatibility test suite. These are the standards by which we hold OEMs and carriers accountable to build their devices so that they are compatible. Once they do that, then we can we being Google, layer all these Google services that we mentioned, like Safety Net, Safe Browsing, and Google Play Protect on these devices that then further protect the device and mitigate vulnerabilities from being exploited by exploit code and malware. So to kind of wrap it up, you can see that we've kind of built this chain or this ladder or layers of security that actually make it extremely difficult for a bad actor to get malware onto a managed device. That's the key. The device is managed. So you have all these components turned on and managed. The reality of malware delivering exploit and then circumventing all the exploit mitigation capabilities and then breaking through the hardware layer security is pretty remote on a managed device. So I want to wrap it up and say thanks for viewing today. Again, I hope you had a great holiday. Stay tuned. We have more live streams coming. But again, if you want more information, you can visit android.com/security and android.com/enterprise. And you can also always go back to androidonair.withgoogle.com to view this and the other webinars on demand. Thanks again.